Hello, sweet listener. How are you? Welcome back to A Brit, a Brat, a 25-year gap, a Seattle age gap marriage. I'm Cecilia Capehart-Bullen. Today we are recording by the Seattle waterfront on one of the piers, and it's such a lovely day. It's by far the most warm and beautiful day we've had in 2021. So we're just out here recording and soaking up the sun.
Yep. Hi, I'm Matt Bullen. It's 64 degrees Fahrenheit.
Lovely.
We walked down the hill, very steep, straight shot right down to the waterfront. If we'd not stopped our legs in time, we'd have been in the water. We're at the Pioneer Square end of the waterfront, end of the piers, and not the Pike Place end.
Yeah, and we're watching all the ferries coming in and out, which is just gorgeous. And definitely before I came and moved to Seattle was what I associated so much with Seattle was the ferries and seeing it in shows and everything, and it's so lovely.
Yeah, and a lot of these ferries are Washington State ferries with their traditional white and dark green livery. Vessels like the Tacoma and the Suquamish travelling back and forth from Bainbridge Island, and then the individual ferries run by different companies.
We took one a while ago. We went to someplace, Bremerton or something, a long time ago. Back
we
in
did,
2018.
and we had a fight.
Yeah, we did. We had a bad fight.
But one of the most.
We both made it back.
Yeah.
On the same ferry. I don't know if I was sitting next to you. I can't remember.
I don't know. I think it's one of the most drab experiences.
I think that was before we were married.
Yeah, I think it was one of the most drab experiences imaginable. Is having a fight with your partner on
then having to wait in that line for the ferry to come.
On a $5 ferry for 30 or 60 minutes.
And being stuck there until it comes again.
Yeah, with the concession stand. I can't speak. The concession stand shut. For someone who doesn't drink, I do a very good job of sounding tipsy.
But we were engaged within a week, but we got married. We met in September. October.
Liar.
Of course, sorry. And then we're married by December, so about 3 months.
Which brings us to what this episode is about. We're going to go into detail. We mentioned last week our gratitude for listener feedback, so we're going to go into some of that in a bit more detail. Then I think I'll leave it to Cecilia to explain.
Oh yeah, we had some fun word associations that I had written down in my notes here.
Yeah.
So that'll be fun as well.
Yeah, Cecilia's idea was to have a word association game where we'd pick on a semi-random phrase and see it from our different generations' perspectives. Is that about right?
Yeah. And I also have some names of people here that I don't think I've showed Matt, but that I wonder if he'll recognize them.
Oh,
and you can do vice versa with me if you want.
But we'll do that on another date, another occasion.
Like you said, we do appreciate the feedback. And it is interesting that we didn't date very long before we got engaged.
Yeah, because that's one of the questions we had. Someone said...
Oh, I think there was a friend of mine from an old job I had in Virginia who was like, "Oh, did you get pregnant? Is that why you're getting married so quickly?" And I was like, "Nope."
Well, and that was...
We just really wanted to be together in that way.
People generally also want to know a bit more about us, a bit more context. So questions like, do we have kids? Are we thinking of having kids? Well, I mentioned last week that I do have a son by my first marriage. He's a terrific young gentleman.
Yes.
And that's all the kids so far. I think it's fair to say we do hope to have at least one child.
One day I would love that. I grew up with 2 sisters, and it's just so lovely to have more family around.
Yeah, and again, to recap, we're both the youngest of 3 children. Both got 2 older sisters.
Spoiled youngest children.
That's it.
The spoiled brat club now.
Yeah, we hope we're not too spoiled.
Yeah.
Here's a point of order. A couple of points of order. Thank you for reminding me before we carry on. Number 1, in case people raise their eyebrows at the title, A Brit, a Brat, and a 25-year gap, how it happened was this. I said to CeCe, if we do this podcast, what are we going to call it? And in a heartbeat, she said, I know, call it A Brit and a Brat. So calling herself a brat.
Or I think I said, Brit-Brat.
Or
which
Brit
was like
Brat.
A clothing brand.
Yeah,
we couldn't use
that's
that.
Right. We couldn't use that. But she came up with it, and I said, that's brilliant. And I think I just tacked on the 25-year gap part. So it wasn't blundering testosterone clumsiness that made me call her a brat.
Yeah, and I don't really think of myself as a brat too much.
Oh, I do.
mean, I loved those dolls, and I have those moments. I know I have those moments. But say, like at work, I'm very professional and responsible, and you got to grow out of some of that. Definitely in my teenage years, I was 100% a brat, a terror. So
Well,
It's a little bit earned.
Well, that was one thing I wanted to clear up. The other thing, as again, another point of order, is that last week, which was quite a serious one, and by the way, I know you heard a lot from me last week, and once again, if I can come to you cap in hand, it wasn't blundering, hey honey, I got this male arrogance. It was just that was a difficult story to tell. It really only took one of us to tell the difficult bits in the middle, most of which centered around me, so that's why I spoke a lot. The other thing I got wrong is that if you were listening last week, someone made a crucial call to my ex-wife who helped save my life. I said that it was my mum who made that call. Actually, it was one of my sisters, so I apologise for that, but as you can imagine, I was being in a coma. I wasn't really in a fit state to remember all the details of that.
Absolutely.
But those two things I got wrong. But back to feedback.
Well, we're
from
just
this
trying
episode.
it out, though, aren't we? So we're new to all of this.
Yeah,
but we
we're
do
new to this.
appreciate the feedback. It's lovely, and I wish everyone could see today. It's just lovely out here with the water, and to get some real sunlight now that spring's coming.
The mountains are visible, and on our right, very close to us, within a stone's throw, is the Ferris wheel. She's
I'm going to throw
distracted me.
something at you now. I'm going to tell you a name.
Oh, don't.
Okay, Nick Jonas.
Yeah, vaguely heard of.
Okay, so what have you heard about him?
I couldn't tell you.
Okay, he was like a teenage heartthrob in the mid-2000s, about 2010, 2009. He was in these Disney Channel movies called Camp Rock. Very big deal. So he was one of those teen heartthrobs. But I didn't think you'd quite know. He's one of three. There were three Jonas brothers.
Yeah, I knew that. I knew the Jonas brothers. But I couldn't tell you.
One of the reasons I mention him is he's in an age gap marriage as well.
Huh.
So his wife, Priyanka Chopra, who's also a famous actress, is older than him. And I've noticed in tabloids and newspapers and things online, they always mention that she's older than him constantly.
Yeah.
You know, kind of like with Harry and Meghan, although the age difference is not that large.
Now, what are we talking about? The mid-2000s, did you say?
Well, he's about my age. Maybe he's 30. I'm not sure. But that was when he was famous.
Well, you know...
Or he's still famous, but that was when he came to fame.
But, you know, I'm going to link this back to what we were saying a couple of minutes ago about having children, which is that, as I hope you'll find one day, whole half-decade blocks, at least, in popular culture can just pass you by.
Yeah.
I mean, everything from about 2002, when our son was born, through till about 2008, 2009, it was just a blur, because all you do is work and take care of the child. But that can happen. Back to feedback. Another piece of feedback we got was video. Someone said, and this is really interesting, their reasoning. They said, why not just do a video podcast? A couple of people seconded that, actually. They said, what we want from the video is to see the facial expressions that you don't realize you're making in relation to each other, which is perfectly fine. And as we've been saying every episode so far, we're going to try and be as transparent and honest as we reasonably can, without either being excruciating. Go on, sorry.
On different podcasts I watch, sometimes seeing the facial expressions is very satisfying, and it's fun, especially if it's more of a famous person or somebody. There's a lot of podcasts where they dress up different outfits and themes, and it kind of fits into it. But that is a great idea. We could explore for sure. And just to follow up, Nick Jonas is 10 years younger than his wife.
10
Priyanka
years?
Chopra. Yes. 28, 38.
Okay, so 10 years younger than his wife. Okay. So as to video, what we've decided to do is that we think our next episode, we will video. It will fit for audio only on Spotify and Buzzsprout and on all the usual platforms. But it'll also, for people who want the video, it'll be on YouTube. And we think we'll do that just occasionally.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And it's fun to try out. I definitely, it's nice, and I enjoy the visuals. Sometimes you want to know what people look like. You you listen to their voices, you kind of make up an image, and it's exciting when you actually get to see what they look like. To the voice.
I think the reason we won't do it every episode for now is that video for every episode is a lot to take on in terms of production, and B, it doesn't necessarily make the most captivating video. Chances are we'd probably be just sitting here as we are now, being filmed. So we'll try it, we think, next episode. So thanks for that suggestion. Another piece of feedback was very interesting. Someone, and this is more really into the meat and drink of the age gap relationship topic, they said that they have recently come out of a marriage with almost a 20-year age gap, and they were keen to point out that their marriage ended not in a particularly pleasant way, but they said that it was nothing to do with the age gap, that it really had to do with, I won't say different agendas, but that each of them went into the marriage expecting or wanting different things.
Yeah, and I think when we had our time apart, it certainly wasn't age difference or being in different places in our life in that sense. It was more behaviors that changed it. That would have been a problem if we had both been in our 20s or in our 30s or closer in age. It still would have been a problem. So those real problems, they pop up no matter what the age difference is. There is one.
I agree. It really unifies a couple of things we've been talking about, which if we can loop back again to the question about why we didn't date longer, which we didn't quite fully answer anyway. We'll come back to that. One element of that,
I guess I was swept off my feet, and we were going to England, and it was just all so exciting.
Yeah.
And it felt like fate to me, like I'd met the exact right person.
So this really loops back to the question about why we didn't date longer. As part of trying to get to, from my point of view, why we didn't date, is that something in those early months told me that I needed to act quite early and very clearly with CeCe, that it wasn't a time to hesitate or to have a long dating sequence.
You had to snap me up.
I had to snap you up. But fascinatingly, and this goes back
and
to...
vice versa.
Yeah, this goes back to what we were just talking about. Something that maybe you could talk about what your mum said about the year apart. That's right. I want to go back to the year apart because your mum said, I'll hand it over to you. She said something fascinating and pretty close. Go on.
She was saying how when we were apart, and I very close with my mom, and I was living with my parents. My mom said that, you guys are really doing the courting, the dating, after you're already married during this year, because we had these long phone conversations, texting each other. You sent me little gifts. And then we had, when I came back for, a month or so and stayed, we stayed together and kind of, okay, it's going to work again. But it really was kind of taking it slow, very slow, especially in the beginning. It was only like texting, a few calls, because we were both sort of hurting from all the fighting before in the fall. And then it's sort of like with the spring, it just came back in slowly and very kind of chastely in a way.
Chaste, that's a good word.
And sweet and nice, and
yeah,
I think both what we could handle at the time, so that was good.
Yeah, because what I love about what your mum said about this being our courtship was that it was a courtship in one of the oldest senses of that word. It was all letters and phone calls.
Yeah, if we had been writing letters and we did, or no, more texting, but same thing.
Well, like I said last time, I think the main virtue of those really quite hectic, certainly alcohol-laced first couple of months for us is that it was sort of like someone rushing out in the middle of a storm to a tent they're trying to put up. In other words, the virtue was that, as it were, I got the girl. And then when we had the year apart, which I still think is a good idea for any couple that wants to try it, to have 3-6 months together and then have a couple of months apart just to see how it feels, to see if it helps you iron out any problems.
Yeah, I don't even think a specific amount of time, but it was well needed, and I'm sure a lot of people know that feeling when you have to have a bit of space.
It was just longer than we anticipated.
It was, yes. It was. Oh, yeah.
That was a sad time. I mean, you were...
horribly hard time.
We really were, as far as you can be in real life, it really was a true living example of that split screen they use in the movies, where on the left side of the screen, I was in Seattle feeling quite sad and lonely, and you were in Herndon, Virginia, feeling the same.
So depressed, yeah, absolutely.
And as I said, we didn't have lovers, either of us, for over a year, even though we were both quite vulnerable.
Yeah. And also with everything that happened with COVID, it was sort of just an isolated time. But I was sort of doing that already kind of before COVID happened, because I was just wanting space and, not feeling social or anything like that. Sort of like going through a breakup that didn't really end up being a breakup, but it was difficult. You're used to getting all this love and being with the person that you love, and then when you're apart, it's just, and break in a hard way. It was so very hard.
Another reason that I was grateful in retrospect for it being a whole year, if not a bit more, was that, and we will return to this theme because we want to do maybe a whole episode about one particular aspect of this that came up more than once, but I really knew how young CeCe was. I mean, she was 23 when we met, and
Yeah.
I just turned 49. And I really wanted her to have thinking time. I didn't want her to be away for that long, but as I say, in retrospect, it was a good thing.
Yeah, and you really didn't put any pressure on me, too much pressure to come back, and
Yeah,
yeah.
it wasn't like that. Shall we? So there was the
So should we do-
feedback.
yeah,
You're looking through your notes.
I
We
am,
don't want to
yeah.
miss anything because we've told several people that we
I
would
wrote Harry
address
and
their.
Meghan down, but I can't remember why.
Oh, I know where we met. That's because our royal family
Oh, yeah,
word
yeah.
association. So
But does that really work as a word association?
yeah. So the way that CeCe told it to me was that she wants to play a word association game where we just give our different generations or individual perspectives on sort of a semi-random word or phrase long before the
Famous
terrible
person name.
yeah long
TV show.
yeah
title.
long before the death of His Royal Highness Prince Philip this weekend just gone. I suggested that the royal family might be a good phrase to start with.
Yeah.
You know, it could have been anything. It could have been pizza restaurants, it could have been soul music or whatever, but
I can think of what I associate with the royal family, but you
Okay.
won't like it. The Crown, the
Go
TV
on.
show.
Go
The
on.
Crown on Netflix.
all
yeah.
right. Well, that's your
yeah,
you're
it's-
26, so
yes.
why?
Oh, well, because it's just so fabulous to see Queen Elizabeth as a young woman. It's very interesting because I had no idea how young she was when she became the queen and how she wasn't actually raised to be a queen. That wasn't how they thought it was going to be because her father was second in line. So they show a lot of that in the early seasons of The Crown and how she actually, her schooling, which I would assume as a royal you would get the best education in the world, but they actually taught her things that weren't that practical for what she had to do in her job. And I do know that it's fiction, but it's just so richly done and you get to feel like you were there. So that's really what I associate. You feel like you get to see it from the inside, which everyone wants with the royal family. You know, that's why they're always hounded by the press and everything. It's just, you imagine their lives to just be absolutely perfect, and they're so full of pressure and so much harder than I could have imagined just through watching the show. I think it's Claire Foy is the actress who plays the young queen, and she's excellent, so good, so much heart into it.
And it's funny because I know that CeCe and a lot of people close to her loved The Crown
Yeah.
and said, Matt, you really should see it. Now, I'm not going to be dogmatic about it. I'm not making a point about it. But what puts me off a bit is that I lived through a lot of it. I was born and became sort of fairly cognizant of the royal family, and well, especially the late 1970s. I remember on the 25th Jubilee, we got a silver coin, each of us at school, inlaid in this black plastic case, which I've still got. I'll show it to you when we get home, love. All these figures, the Queen, Prince Charles, Lady and then Princess Diana, Mrs. Thatcher, I saw this play out live, so it's a bit odd and it feels a bit redundant to get a dramatised version of it.
But here's what I'm saying. The early seasons you were not alive for.
True.
It's very fascinating to see sort of how it formed and how she was treated when she first started, because I think by the time you were born she was extremely respected, but when she first started it wasn't that way, and a lot of people wanted to influence how she behaved, and she wasn't really taken seriously. She was just a young woman.
That's true.
Yeah.
It,
But I think it's interesting that, I mean, you grew up not far away from where they live, which is just so cool to me. Like, I grew up not far from where the White House, where the president lives.
well,
the
last
seat of
week
government.
I talked with Gratitude, and I'll have a word with... We often talk in this podcast about my sister that, or my mum this, or my first wife that, whatever it might be. And we'll have a word to see if they don't mind being named, because we'd love to give props and thanks where necessary. But for now, let's suffice it to say that the sister who I spoke about last week, who came to Seattle to help me after I was so seriously ill, she once met Princess Diana.
Oh, yes.
My sister
you
was,
told me this.
she was a young reporter, and in my hometown, Guildford, where there's a big cathedral, and any of you who are fans of the film The Omen from the 1970s will know the driveway up to Guildford Cathedral very well. Anyway, Princess Diana, or Lady Diana as she then was, visited Guildford Cathedral, and my sister went out with her reporter's notebook in the pouring rain to meet her at the entrance.
So sweet.
As she got out of the car, they sort of exchanged glances, and Lady Diana saw my sister completely soaked with a wet notebook and said, I really wouldn't like your job. And my sister, quick as a flash, looked at her and said, I wouldn't like your job either. So she did actually briefly meet her. But now, I've got something to say about Harry and Meghan, but you wrote it down, love, so you go ahead.
What was I going to say about them?
I don't know, but I bet it was good.
It's that Meghan is a wee bit older than Harry, but I think I already said that. So little age gap there. But I think it's unique. Often in celebrity culture, you see the man being much older than the woman and that not being a big deal. Or, it's very common, but with the women being older, it's a bit different. So, what were you going to say about them?
Well, what I have to say, a couple of things more about the royal family from my point of view. The first is about Harry and Meghan and William and Kate, which is that I don't know why there's some disappointment in Britain in the majority of Americans, US Americans, being so supportive of Meghan and Harry, but Meghan especially. And I think sometimes the Brits have got short memories, because I remember living through the grief, which some of us thought was a bit overwrought in points, but grief's very personal, so we won't go into that. But I remember living through that and how people said, oh, the world needs to learn from Princess Diana's mental health issues, eating disorders and so on. And of course, it's especially hard on Harry and William. So I was saying to CeCe, if you got a couple of good writers let's think of some good recent TV dramas, let's say Unforgiven. Breaking Bad, all right, if you like.
Breaking Bad, sorry.
Unforgiven, Luther, The Crown, and put them in a room and said, look at Princess Diana, what happened to her, and project 25 years and think what would happen to those two little boys. I think it is completely emotionally and intellectually logical that you would have William turn out the way he has, I think beginning to realise maybe that he's going to inherit the throne one day with a very responsible and a wife who conducts herself and well, as does he, and that the other brother meets up with an assertive American woman and decides as boldly as they can to move away from that, because they don't want the same mistakes, the same kind of tragedy to happen as did to his mother. So it all makes perfect sense to me. I think both couples are terrific and they're doing their best to support good causes and so on.
And I think it's also interesting that a lot of people don't believe that they were treated so poorly in that interview with Oprah and everything that they said. So it's very interesting, because I'm sure that Diana had the same kind of treatment. From what I can understand, she didn't get a lot of support when she first became engaged to Charles. She didn't feel like she had a lot of coaching or just like any kind of confidence from the royal family. They sometimes would hang her out to dry. And then with her intense popularity, that was difficult. And I think with the intense love and popularity for Harry and Meghan, it seems that it always is like that. They're very popular at the wedding, and then they turn on the woman. Usually they turn on them and they're not doing things the right way. I guess she didn't wear stockings when she was pregnant or something like that. Just little tiny things. And I can understand why you're like, you know what? We don't need to live this way. She's an American, from the United States. They can come back here. And I think it's difficult for people because of that huge royal wedding, and they could feel like they kind of belong to the crown, and then they leave. So it's hard.
Do you mean Harry and Meghan's wedding?
Yeah.
Or I should say the Duke and Duchess of Sussex?
Their wedding.
There's two events that I think dwarfed that in magnitude, which is Princess Diana's wedding and her funeral. And both, it's difficult to convey, and hopefully people listening to this who are around my age will be nodding along. It's difficult to convey just how huge, what an impact both those things had. It really was seen as the first fairy tale wedding for a long time, Princess Diana. That's one thing I have to say, but I'll be quiet again. Anything else from you about the royal family from the perspective of someone who's in their mid-20s?
No, just watch The Crown. I love The Crown.
Yeah, I think the other thing, I said I had two things to say about when I think about the royal family generally, just to say this quickly, which is inevitably, especially when people hear my accent, it brings up the whole notion of class, British class and the class system, which can be so mysterious to people. And there are so many subtleties about how it works. But Cecilia, this happened long before we met, so this is just my favourite anecdote about I have about class, and it really sums up everything I think about it. And it's not set in Britain, it's set in Seattle. When I was working in children's healthcare, and again I'm going to say long before we met, there was a young mum who I worked with, professionally for what ended up to be years, and she had a very seriously ill child who was constantly in, very medically complex. She herself, the mum I'm talking about, had her own health issues, and she would come in relentlessly cheerful. Whatever was up with her or child, she would come in to the hospital and do whatever she needed to. And remember, this was sustained over years with, I'm sure, a lot of uncertainty.
Great attitude, yeah.
Why am I telling you this? I'll tell you. Years after I left that children's healthcare centre where I worked, somehow she and I remained friends, and we got to comparing notes. At one point, we said something about, we should keep in touch and meet for lunch. And I said, I'm single, I'm by myself. I didn't know why I didn't ask you out for lunch, because I've been admiring you from afar, and I'm not working in a professional capacity now. And this is the point of this story. She said, Matt, it's funny you say that. She said, and I'm paraphrasing her, but she said, I really wanted to ask you for a date, but I hesitated because, she said, I didn't think I was up in your class. Now, this is someone who has virtually dragged heaven and earth to support her child and herself in one of the most...
Must have been the accent.
Well, maybe it was. But that really sums up. I mean, she is the classiest person. And it makes me laugh or cry, so I'll just laugh to think that when we were both single, she hesitated to ask me for a date because she thought I was a little bit out of her league. Yeah. And I feel like getting down on my knees and saying, that is not the way round it works. Which, by the way, tell me what you think of this, CeCe. I'd love your opinion on this. I don't like that old phrase that we've all heard, either we've used it or we heard it maybe said about us, which is that him or her, X or Y, forget about it because you're not in their league. You're not in their class.
Yeah, they made a movie called She's Out of My League.
What do you think about that saying? I hate it for just the sort of reason I've outlined.
I don't like it. I don't like it at all. I feel like it's kind of antiquated and stupid. But it reminds me of like high school. Oh no! Where it was definitely, you knew where you were at. You knew what league you were in and what guys you could talk to or not. And obviously it was like I definitely had that feeling many times in my life that someone is out of my league. It wasn't until I got into my late teens and 20s that I thought, I'll just ask them out and see what happens. Just see what happens. And you know what? Sometimes it does not pay off at all. And they won't text you back, or it's a little bit embarrassing, but that's okay. Well, I think it's good to go for it, whether it's if you feel they're out of your league, try to do it anyway.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Oh, wait, but I just thought of something. One thing is that if you do date someone who's out of your league, which I've done, it can be quite hard because I've had to pretend to be like a very cool girl that I was not, and like down with a lot of things that I couldn't do, such as sports and other things. So that can be a challenge. If you actually get them, then it actually sometimes doesn't work out, because sometimes it's not really about league. It's about like, are you compatible or not? People that were like, in my eyes, very cool, but also like I just didn't like the environment, and it wasn't quite for me. But
well, what's the other thing?
You gotta try.
Do your best English schoolboy impression of me and the school I went to in the word cricket.
That's too much.
I'm Matthew. What was it you say?
Oh,
you say.
I can't.
Go on, give it your best shot. You do an American accent. So you what she does is she puts a fake cup of tea in a saucer up to her lips. And she says.
No, I usually put my hands up to my sides and I go, I'm Matt, and that's usually the start, and then.
And what is that?
You're just a prissy little head boy. Oh yeah, and you're very posh school.
And what?
And he likes to remind
cricket?
people of it. Yeah. And the cricket was invented here, and it's 5,000 years old, and. However many years old it was.
And then when she's done with that, I look at her and I put the same fake bone china cup up to my mouth and say,
you don't have bone china, by the way. But
my name's Cecilia Capehart. My name's Cecilia Capehart-Bullen. My great granddaddy was a famous senator, and do as I say.
You care about that much more than I do.
Well,
Here
and
in
you,
the USA,
and
doesn't matter.
Yeah, and
who
I
your
heard
parents
you.
were.
I heard you go out to at least 3 people as we passed on the walk here today, and you said you stopped them and you said,
Oh
"Did
my
you know
God,
my
yeah.
husband went to the school where the word
Yeah.
cricket was invented?"
Because if
And
anyone
they don't
stops
care.
and talks to strangers, it's definitely me. Only not, because it's definitely you. And then you have to stand there and I have to wait. I'm so mean. Oh.
You know, it's a good job.
That's something I do admire about you, Matt, though, is that you're much more social and polite than I can be. When we see people we used to know, like if I'm alone, my go-to reaction will be, oh, if I don't know them that well, I hide or I walk or I turn the other way.
But I think you're wrong. I think you're wrong. I think you're much more cut out for the Seattle milieu about casual conversation in stores and things.
Oh, well,
because the trouble with me, I've sort of thought about this a lot, because I really don't, I'm not a very popular man, and I don't have a lot of friends, and yet Seattle's a friendly place. And I think what it is, and you're much better at this, is that I read once in an etiquette book this line that's always stuck with me.
See, there's your first mistake. You read an etiquette book.
Hang on. Hear me out. Hear me out, woman. And this line has always stuck with me, and it said in italics, "The agreeable person agrees." I usually have a problem with that, because there's a side of me that's more at home in Southeast London or somewhere.
We've got to get to, yeah.
That I just find it hard to be that agreeable. There comes a point, usually too soon,
See, but I admire that, because you're speaking your mind. And I have been in so many situations where people, and a lot of times this is at work, but people will say things that are so offensive to me. And I'm like, yeah, okay. And I just keep going. And I be a chameleon and just, I don't maybe go on about it, but I don't stand up for what I believe in or anything like that. People are being sexist or racist or just homophobic or whatever. I work with elderly people, so there you go. But it's not really your place when you're at work. But even in social situations, I'm really not comfortable disagreeing with people. Sometimes I think people that do disagree, you get a little bit of respect from other people, because it kind of, what's the point in always agreeing? You got to speak your mind.
Yeah. Well, certainly, what I'm not
to an extent, I should say.
Let me make it clear, that was not a backhanded comment about how Seattle people are. I mean, I find it hard to imagine living in another city. I found people here so lovable and agreeable.
They are very lovely.
So it wasn't a comment on them.
Being more in the west of the United States is just a bit more friendly. But it's still a city. I mean, it's not a small town. People aren't going to always be kind or considerate, but we're very lucky.
So it was really a comment about my the way that I don't fit into society quite well sometimes than it is.
But you quite enjoy that, don't you? Being an
sometimes,
outlier. But maybe it gets old, people asking you where you're from. And
well, no, but anyway, let's just finish the thought and finish the compliment to you, which is that you are very gracious, and you see. I don't want to go too much off topic, but another reason why I think we glued together so well, personality-wise, from the start, is that there's something I discerned in you that was not readily obvious, which means the same thing, but anyway, it wasn't obvious, which is that underneath that really sort of colourful, fun-loving exterior and early adulthood, I think you're actually a very old-fashioned girl, and that extends to, you were brought up magnificently.
Well, I've read that book many times. What you just said is I do have great parents. And a joke that people used to say is, yes, and sisters. I love my sisters and my parents.
I love your family. I love mine too.
And when my friends used to come to my home, they would say, it's like going back to the 1800s or something. Like, because it was my parents have the way they speak and everything is very formal in a way. So that's how we sort of grew up with that. But I am very blessed because, well, I appreciate the compliment.
And this is a compliment to your family, because I think they put into practice that wonderful old saying, which is that the best definition of manners is to put people at their ease.
Yeah. And both my parents are English majors, as is my eldest sister.
Yeah.
And, that was very important. And even in my extended, like with my mother's parents, my grandparents, it was just so important to read and this is something I loved about Matt when Matt first took me back to his apartment, it was how many books there were in there. It made me feel so at home because I grew up with just piles of books. And I'd say, oh, we need the Odyssey for class. And I can always remember my parents going, oh, we've got it. And they'd pause and go, somewhere. And I go, oh, never mind, I'm going to order it because we'll never find it. And the second you order the book, then you find the old one. But anyway, I love that about you. And Matt's such a great reader, well, especially of Woodhouse.
Yeah, mostly P.G. Woodhouse.
Yeah, P.G. Woodhouse.
Let's make the comment symmetrical, which is that I have to pay tribute to my mum and my late dad because they were very similar. Your parents remind me, your family reminds me of that. You know, you've got two lovely sisters and so have I. But yeah, my mum and dad were very... In fact, that's just to strike a slightly serious note for a second. That was one of the things I regret most about when I was drinking, which is that we said last week something that was that my first trip to visit CeCe's parents didn't go well. Well, that was largely down to me. In fact, almost totally down to me because I was drinking. But I wasn't rude as such. I meant well, but I just forgot good manners, and so and that's important to both of our families, isn't it?
Oh, of course, but more than that, just I had problems with addiction pretty young in my life, starting around I don't know 14 or 15, and then throughout my teens. My parents were dealing with that with me, so I think when we came back to visit, they're more than anything scared of addiction because of where it can lead, and they were so worried about me in that phase, and but I'm very lucky because they're so forgiving, and they gave me so much support and help, and so much therapy, especially when I was young, literally kicking and screaming, not wanting to go, and they still made me go, which is something that I'm so grateful for, because there's some points in your life where you won't do the thing that you need to do for yourself, and it takes someone else who loves you enough to come in and make you do it. Even if you say, I hate you and I don't want to do it, they still persist. I've gotten a little taste of that back being a caregiver, because sometimes a client won't want to do something, won't want to go and get maybe medical assistance or whatever it is, and you have to sort of convince them, even if they're going to get angry, which for me can be kind of nerve-wracking, but yeah.
It's funny, just before you were saying that about a lesson you've learned from your own experience that you applied to your work, when we were talking about, sort of jokingly, about being a bit awkward or not quite fitting in socially, I was thinking about that, and I've concluded that it had something to do with my work. You've just talked about your work, which is similar as a caregiver. What it is that I worked so frequently with so many different families in the pediatric field, and I didn't know what was coming round the corner next. So I hope this makes some sense to listeners, which is that what you learn to do with each encounter, especially when it gets kind of relentless, is that people often said, oh, Matt, you're a good listener, and I appreciate that, but what you really do is you really start more to absorb people, because you've got so much to go on. When you meet them and they're 3 feet away, you've got eye contact, body language, how the people next to them, like their partners or kids, look at you or talk about you, as well as the words they speak. And so I think I got so used to doing that you can do your best to absorb and summarize people in your head in a few seconds, not in the arrogant sense that you therefore know them well. Of course not, that's idiotic, but you have to go on as little evidence as best you can,
and it's like that first impressions thing, which I used to really hold a lot of weight to. First impressions were so important, but I've now realized no, sometimes you have to adjust your thinking, especially when you're dealing with medical situations and people are under intense stress. How they behave can really change depending on the day and what's going on. I think so what I love about you, Matt, is when you were working at the Children's Health Center, or even after you left when I had met you, is that you still wanted to help people. I remember one time with a woman who was visually impaired with her son. You helped them on the light rail, on the metro, and those types of things. So that instinct is good to have, even when you're just out and about and not at work.
Well, I like to think that I'm a bit more humane than being just transactional, but there is
very empathetic.
Well, thanks.
Yeah. And I think
you're a tremendously helpful, polite person. You would give anyone your last dollar, and in fact, until people started to abuse that, you did, didn't you? I mean, it's funny.
It's difficult for me to say no, and that's hard. But I think also being what? Why are you laughing?
We got a good story. So there's someone once who we used to see quite a lot. This person, I'll dither the signal here because just in case she listens to this one day, which is possible. This person we saw a lot, and she was, her home, I think, was maybe transitional. She wasn't doing too well, and she often asked for money, which is fine. We all need money, and so she asked. Then we were on good terms with her, weren't we?
Well, yeah, because she was a neighbor of ours because she was always where we shopped at.
Yeah.
And so, we got to talking a few times and, getting to know her over months and months, really.
And so one day, I gave her $1, as we often usually did, once a week or something. And CeCe heard her say, as we walked away,
oh, yeah, she was like, oh, just what I need, another $1.
Yeah, another single.
Yeah, just as in, yeah. And I've had people say that to me before. They'll be like, you don't have any more? Trying to look in my wallet. It's difficult.
But really,
because you want to,
you hit on it the other day.
And then,
I mean, this is such a difficult one because anything we say sounds like the voice of again, sort of blundering privilege, not understanding what it's like. But that's not the point. It's just that sometimes people they've responded to you recently, like you'll give them several dollars and they'll say like, that's not enough or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, in a way it's funny, but also I kind of get it. I used to do sales, and sometimes once you got them on the hook, you're going to gouge them for everything they've got, or not, you know what I mean? But
that's a difficult one. But no, you're tremendously gracious.
Yeah, well, I am.
Oh, the other thing I was just going to say is that I hope I'm not just this transactional, but let's not forget that going back to that first episode, I did not properly thank whatever motorist or passerby it was the very first time I collapsed on the way to that ballet dance company interview. Someone phoned when they didn't have to, and I think I might have bled to death. That was the first collapse, not the second one that led to the coma. So you just try and help people.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I like to think I would anyway, as I say, but
well, yeah, the other day we were at the bus stop and a guy collapsed, and I got the ambulance to come and get him.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. We were just about to do that difficult second episode, and it was all about people doing favours for me the times I collapsed.
I think also,
So we were waiting. We'd just been to
and we live
groceries.
near where a lot of unsheltered people are living currently in Seattle. We're very close to one of those places, and so, luckily there's so many hospitals and ambulances and things like that, because a lot of people in that situation are going to have medical problems.
Yeah.
So,
well, should we wrap this episode up? We hope the noise in the back. We hope this episode has been a lot lighter hearted than the last one. We hope the sound of the seagulls has been nice. If we've caught that on the microphone.
And we wish you all well.
Yeah.
And next episode we will be filming.
We'll be filming. It'll just be an occasional thing, but we really are at pains to make this fun, but also a bit useful. And if there are things like facial expressions or body language that we're not aware of, we want you to see that. We don't mind. We're in love. And so
that's true.
So and as CeCe said at the very start of the very first episode, everyone, let's end it here. This is in essence a love story. It's more than a love story, and one thing we love to do is to hear from you. So please comments below if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening, aBrit&aBrat@gmail.com. That's aBrit&aBrat@gmail.com. Please email us. Also email us your words and phrases for word association. Anything you like.
And thanks so much for listening.
Okay, see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.